Hey everybody, how's it going? We're gonna do a copy today, or like a master's study in a way, of John Singer Sargent's Portrait of Lady Agnew. It's probably maybe his most famous painting aside from Madame X, but either way, we're gonna be working on it here on this canvas in the center. I'm gonna do a kind of NoTan study, so it's gonna be all in grayscale, and I'll probably zoom in a little bit to like her portrait because I'm kind of mostly interested in like the value relationships in her head. So even though like the source image out here looks a little bit larger, I'm going to be kind of zooming in like just a little bit. I also want to take a quick look at all my specs over here on my computer screen to make sure that the stream is going fine. Everything looks like it's okay. If, by the way, you guys have questions and stuff you want to talk about, just pop them in the comments and I'll chat about them while I'm working. It'll probably be a little bit absent-minded sometimes because drawing and talking are a little bit separate, but we'll get there in the end. Also, if anybody could confirm to me that the sound was working fine, that would be super awesome, just so I know. But without further ado, I'm just going to kind of dive in. I want to make sure I get that head onto the canvas in the right size though, because there's that really nice way that her neck kind of comes down like this, and then there's that beautiful area like where the dress is kind of framing her. Just want to make sure I get the right shape of it, because if I don't get that now, you know what I mean, I'm not going to get it ever. So let's see if we wind up getting it in the right place. Let's see, M. Collins and Sophia and everybody are confirming that the sound is cool. And Callum Gillespie is asking, hey, Stephen, can you say which is to say? I feel like that's like one of those like internet things where you're going to record me saying that and then like use it as like some voice recognition at a website somewhere. That worries me a lot. That's okay. So maybe a head about this size is cool. Yeah, I don't want to go much larger. I hope, by the way, all of you out there have got your like sketch pads or you've got your iPads or whatever it is, because like the whole idea here would be that that you kind of sketch along with me. Because I get the feeling, for people that are like kind of out there working in the world, and maybe you don't have an atelier that you attend or whatever, a school that you attend, getting that call to action, is a little bit challenging. I know like a lot of my Patreon subscribers, they're people that are my age, which is to say I'm 40, right? So like, I can't I think of myself as like I'm 25 still, but I'm not. But anyway, people have like lives and things that are like kind of asking for their attention, and sometimes that takes away from your drawing and painting time. So just want to like do these live streams so that to kind of connect with everybody, and so we can all kind of get a good reason to kind of take the time to make these studies. Anyway, you probably know that if you follow me, so that's not too much of a surprise. I just want to like check some of the comments. So MJ is asking here, aside from the ongoing features and curriculum live and Olivia's portrait in color, what else do you have to plan on your Patreon? So MJ is asking, like, basically aside from the like dozen things that I have going on this month, what else do I have going on Patreon? Well, curriculum live is taking up a lot of my attention right now, mostly because it's really kind of extensive in terms of like how I'm preparing for it, right? So if anybody, by the way, like the most recent version of Curriculum Live was yesterday. So I did like a 3-hour live stream on kind of drawing fundamentals. So if anybody was there, then you probably know that there were like really extensive lesson notes that went along with it. So you have like all of the kind of background research that I'm doing, and all of the notes that I'm just taking for myself as well, to help me kind of understand all of the kind of info I'm gonna put out. And because there's so much info, like you kind of have to, or I kind of have to anyway, I don't know, maybe other people are different, but I kind of have to do like a lot of preparation if I'm gonna lecture for 3 hours. That's quite a bit for me. But yeah, like I said, if you see those notes, then kind of what I'm going through and like the stuff that I'm getting at to kind of bring to you guys. And if you're not aware of that stuff, like, and you're looking for um, you know, I don't know, like if you're looking for drawing instruction, well, it's on my Patreon. MJ knows all about it, but maybe some of you other folks out there, you don't know yet. But if you have questions, Gavin Hubbard saying, Stephen, don't tell him how old we are. Yeah, yeah, for real. um, let's see. Kelsey Fisher is saying, when a portrait is not working out, what do you rely on to figure it out? Measuring, anatomy, or site size? Well, I'll say so. Site size that Kelsey's referring to is something that I taught at the Florence Academy. It's their kind of main method of observation. It has some strengths, some weaknesses, like anything. But when I'm not using that, what am I using? Like especially like when I come up against adversity, which I mean, naturally, the natural state of like working is that you come up with adversity, right? So what do you do, and what do you kind of rely on? Some of it is a bit reactive in the sense that, like, for instance, if I have been doing the portrait very much in site size, then probably to solve some of the problems that I've come up against, I might have to go like a little bit outside of that, right? So I might go to kind of making comparative measurements, or I might go to, kind of looking in my mirror. But in general, it's always gonna be like kind of a combination of those things, I guess. There's not usually one that solves, like, the magic bullet that kind of like solves the rest of them. However, I can say though that I do generally work a lot with anatomy. So for me, that's a kind of a go-to. Like if you don't have like a lot of background working with anatomy, maybe that's not your go-to. So you have to kind of resort to something else. By the way, I also want to mention, right, like I'm doing basically a NoTan study, which is essentially a breakdown of the value structure of the painting. And in doing that, I'm not really going to be blending anything here. So I'm just going to be working with a set of probably 8 or 9 values that I have kind of pre-programmed over here. And I'm just going to see how close to Sargent's composition, a value I can get to, with just these values. And I think that's kind of the fun thing about it for me is that it's like this limitation that eventually kind of reveals something to you, something hopefully that is quite interesting. So while I'm gonna make, hopefully, if I don't mess it up, I'm gonna make like a decent portrait of Lady Agnew. It's also my aim really is to kind of get a good kind of study of the values of this painting out of it. And I think like NoTan studies as well, by the way, for all of you out there, kind of working on your own projects and trying to figure it all out. NoTan studies are a great way to kind of engage with master copy, which is something that I feel certainly is like obviously a really strong way to gain skill, right? Because we know maybe a little bit about painting. I mean, I've been working in this field for maybe 20 years now, and I know a bit, but eventually I know that like kind of Sargent knows more. So if I can kind of figure out based on his practices, some of the things that I can do in my work, I think that's always going to be like a benefit. Anyway, but maybe you know that already. Oh my goodness, like a lot of questions coming in. I want to see if I can scroll up and kind of get to some of them. MJ was asking, what are the 7 concepts that you mentioned that they teach in Florence? The 7 concepts thing, the more analytical among you have really picked up on that and are really asking for literally what they are. I mean, you could say that I mean, there are literally like several concepts that we use that are kind of standardized, right? But there's not literally seven concepts. It's more of like a figurative idea that essentially is trying to indicate that painting and drawing are not inherently like the most complicated things. They're just kind of the lessons are rather are deep rather than broad, I guess, is the point that I'm trying to bring home in making that statement. So if you're looking for what the seven concepts are, really just look for what repeats, right? What I'm saying kind of over and over, like shadow shape, light shape, right? Like value relationships, drawing with straight lines, squinting down to assess value. All these things are, essentially like their own categories, and eventually you kind of want to drill down into them to kind of get to the foundation, like get to what they're all about, what they're actually trying to say. Because if anything, in education, a lot of times we kind of get introduced to a subject, but we don't really get to necessarily figure out, everything that's possible within that subject. And I think that's what I would encourage students to do is kind of drill down, always try to search for like the level that goes slightly deeper in terms of your understanding about how to draw and paint. So really that's what that's about. It's like I said, of course there are 7 or 8 or 9 things or whatever that we do talk about over and over, but in a sense those are a little bit like kind of self-evident. Like when I walked in the door, nobody said to me, hey, here's the 7 things. Yeah, so let's see other questions. Jamie Gertler, who actually told me how to pronounce her name yesterday, but I kind of forgot it. I apologize. It's a French name, so this is like a zzz in there somewhere that I don't know about. But she says that the lecture yesterday must have taken a lot of prep. It was so in depth. Yeah, you can say that again. The amount of prep, of course, the other side to that too is that since I've been doing this stuff for as long as I have, in a way, I've got like kind of 20 years or so of prep that went into it. So it's not all new preparation, but certainly for every lecture in the Curriculum Live series, I go through like extensive note making and extensive kind of review of the topic that I'm going to get into during that lecture. Like I said, like most of these things are so like multifaceted that if you didn't like really kind of review well, you'd probably wind up skipping a few things that is going to leave the lecture kind of wanting for a little bit of information. So I try my best to be pretty strict about how much prep I do. But there's only so many hours in the day, Right, so let's see. Oh, there's so many questions coming in. I'm not going to get to them all, but let's see. Elihad Bugiera says, hey, Stephen, I have a question. Do art materials qualities matter, especially pencils? Yeah, you know what? There actually are a lot of differences in the quality of pencils that you can get. And, I'd love to say that materials don't matter, but it's all about levels, right? Like they matter kind of up to a point. And if your materials are so bad that they're inhibiting you, then they can matter. Like there is paper, by the way, in particular, like drawing paper. There are papers that kind of I think are not so nice. It is going to come down to taste. Like the paper that I don't think is nice, maybe some other artist is like having a great time with it and will recommend it in all their workshops. So that's cool. I don't want to say like there's like an absolute sense, but depending on what your goals are, like if you want to do drawings that have like a lot of like really dark, rich values, choosing a flimsy paper is going to put you at a little bit of a disadvantage there. So I would say like in that sense, yeah, like the paper will definitely matter at a certain point. So be aware of that. As far as pencils go, I think it starts to matter like past a certain point. Like the pencils that I really love are made by Mitsubishi. There's a guy, an artist, It's a good friend of mine when I was living in New Jersey. He has a studio in I think in the Bronx. Anyway, point being, he introduced me to these Mitsubishi pencils, and I think they're really really nice. It's interesting because there's two grades of like Mitsubishi pencil, and they almost look exactly the same. One is the like I think it's High Uni, Hi hyphen UNI, and that pencil's fantastic. And then there's another one that looks almost the same and has almost the same name, but it's not quite as nice. So maybe I'll put eventually. I think actually, you know what? I think in the FAQ post on my Patreon page, I think I've already actually indicated like exactly which one it is and left a link to that. So if you are like super interested in what that pencil is, there's a way to find it. You just got to go to that link because I can't remember off the top of my head. Let's say Hoa Du is asking any tips on finishing details. I think that really probably the most productive tip that I can give you on finishing details is to make sure that everything comes before that everything that comes before them is done really really well, because they're the kind of thing that, like, I don't know, like if you were, you know, building a building and you had like a really bad foundation, you know, by the time you got to the top, it's like this skyscraper, you'd the whole thing would like tumble as soon as you tried to put the top on. I think like kind of paintings and drawings can be like that. Like a block in that has kind of bad qualities can survive, but as soon as you start to try to like put on like detail, it kind of reveals a little bit the problems, you know. It's almost like everything was going fine until we actually like kind of tried to go to details, and then you start to see all those kind of flaws come out. So I would just say that I mean, in terms of finishing, you know, I don't want to like totally jump around the question, because you know, there are a lot of concepts, a lot of ideas that are really useful when we're talking about, you know, finishing a drawing or a painting. But I think they're kind of like difficult to like kind of communicate in the abstract. I think that a lot of that stuff, you know, it's great to be able to like show it while you're doing it, is in my experience. So just, I would say, what can I say that's really useful about finishing? You know, try to understand like what the hierarchy of like finishing, I guess, in a way, in your painting is, right? Like, do you want to finish everything to the same level, or is there a compositional ploy that you are making which will want you in a way to actually leave some things a little bit less finished? You know, make the finishing in a way like a part of the composition, you know, because our eyes are kind of drawn to high detail, and so if you just kind of put high detail everywhere, eventually it actually can become a little bit, I think, a little bit distracting. Of course, that's slightly a taste issue, but just something worth being kind of aware of when you're working is that everything that you're doing, you know, formally kind of contributes to the composition. And if you do it really without thinking or without kind of searching for that balance, you can definitely disrupt for sure your composition by finishing things arbitrarily. So hopefully that's helpful. Let's see. Yeah, so Chami is asking if I'm going to work on this in color. No, this is going to be a NoTan exercise. So this is going to be all about just studying this painting in terms of its value structure. Just trying to kind of work within that limitation and kind of follow hopefully the spirit of his composition here, and kind of maybe reveal something a bit interesting about his thought process in doing so. But we'll see. You know, these NoTan studies are can be very tricky. Like as I look at this whole area down here, like so let me circle that. Like down here, you know, he's working in such a narrow value scale. You know, it's oof. I wonder even like how much of the like the picture I'm really going to be able to capture without color. But see, like the thing is, like even that is kind of a revelation, right? To see like how much Sargent is really just working with color in those areas. I find that kind of fascinating, actually. Also, we have like at the very bottom of the composition, we have that gem, right? So this little bit of the necklace down here, that's essentially kind of the lightest light. Even the highlight that sits on her cheek here is maybe not quite as light as that one, and so we're kind of trying to create a balance, in between, that lightest light and kind of all the others. And again, like if I get that wrong, then the whole thing kind of tumbles over like a house of cards, right? By the way, that's like the for me, it's the fun thing with these live streams is that like I have to have to get it right like while I'm talking about stuff, and that's the added level of difficulty is massive there. So Sampo is asking, hey, out of curiosity, what's your take on sketchbooking? Do you have a portable sketchbook that you frequently draw in? You know, you know what? I don't actually. I believe so much, and I think that people that do carry sketchbooks, listen, there's nothing but good that is going to come out of that. And when I was running around in Florence as a student, I definitely like had a sketchbook that I carried around with me, because like you're kind of in so many different places where that can be like applicable and interesting, right? Like you're going to museums all the time. you know as my life has continued as like a teacher, you know and an artist, like most of my work is just done in the studio. So like I don't actually do like a lot of work in circumstances where actually a sketchbook would be applicable. So no, I don't carry one around. And here, like now living in Norway, I do even less work outside the studio. Like I'm the only time that I work is when I'm like at home, kind of working in the studio, kind of making tutorials or getting up to whatever I'm doing. So no, but I think it's a great discipline. In fact, if you're an artist out there and you're studying at an atelier and you've got this great, like super controlled environment that allows you to kind of execute your work in a way that is like really, really at a high level. And Andrew Loomis talks about this. This is not like kind of my idea necessarily, but sketching in less than ideal circumstances, um, there is a value in that, right? Because what it's doing is kind of introducing you to variables that maybe you don't exactly know about before, and so it kind of pushes you a little bit outside your comfort zone. But it's not the comfort that I'm saying that you need to get rid of. It's more the regularity, right? Like if you're able to experience different things, I think you're necessarily going to learn different things. So I think that eventually becomes very interesting. So sketchbooks, yeah, fantastic. Please keep using them, and yeah, get as much as you can out of that experience. M. Collins is asking, is there a method for choosing when to work tonally versus the wireframe block-in? Yeah, the wireframe that he's talking about here is in a way like my kind of more standard block-in style when I'm working on something. Really, it depends upon like what the end point is, right? Like so many things in drawing and painting, you got to think about, well, what do I need the painting to look like, or what do I need the drawing to look like? And if your end goal is to kind of study the structure of something, I think perhaps that studying or working with a wireframe. I mean, that's certainly what I do, right? If I'm going to make something that needs to be rather precise, for me, that's the way that I go. That's not the case really for everybody. There's going to be artists out there who really prefer to work in masses of value, and there's just no way to discount that. I think some of it just is like, well, what are you comfortable with? You just kind of do what you're comfortable with anyway, and that's not bad at all. In a way, it's about like kind of aptitudes. I think actually that in some ways, kind of leaning into your comfort zone, I think can be a really good thing sometimes. Like there's this practice that you get into as a student where I think you're always looking at where your weaknesses are, and you're always looking at how can you improve those things. And that's a great attitude to take as a student, because really when you kind of start out, we don't really know a lot. As I mean, we can know a lot about ourselves or whatever, but in terms of like technique and actually this the skills of painting, we don't know a lot. So getting out of our comfort zone like makes a lot of sense, right? And experiencing new things. However, like when you're gonna be like a professional artist, I mean, you need to execute paintings. So if you're always kind of searching for a way to be out of your comfort zone, I mean, you're definitely going to disrupt a little bit like your ability to execute a painting. So let's say you got to find a balance there. I think I really digressed outside of outside of what the question was. But let's see. Ben Campbell's asking, do you recommend any books for head anatomy? Definitely check the FAQ post on my Patreon page. There's actually probably a link in the description of this video to my Patreon page. And the FAQs post is a free post, so you don't actually need to subscribe to take a look at it. So if you kind of scroll down the page a bit, probably you can find, like I said, just that FAQ post. And in that, I think I have some book recommendations and things that of a practical nature like that. Also, a lot of like materials recommendations and just obviously, it's called FAQs, so like just a lot of stuff that usually gets asked that I kind of answer over and over and over, which I have no problem doing, but you'll get a probably more clear, like better answer by going there than by listening to me here. Let's see. Jamie is asking if I don't mess it up. LOL, I'd love to see your mess ups. Yeah. Hey, listen, I did a post actually on Insta a while back that was exactly that. I kind of posted this like giant roll of like papers and canvases and everything else. And it was all paintings that just didn't make it. Paintings that just did not work out and had to make it into the bin. And it's a painful thing, but we've all absolutely been there. Yeah, I don't know, maybe the thing is about my like the ones that I mess up, I don't tend to like keep them around too long, so they kind of really bum me out. So probably I don't even know if I have. I'll take a look in the archive and see like what I have in there that I can't stand. I mean, there's plenty of it. I think everybody has a little bit of that stuff in the studio, and I always had this like super optimistic feeling that I'm gonna go back to that one. Like eventually, yeah, that painting still has like a little bit of life in it. I bet if I come back to it later, I bet I can get the right effect that I was looking for or something. And sometimes I do, probably a lot of times, it's just like a false hope that because my inspiration usually will wander after a while, and I think we're all probably pretty similar in that once that particular kind of excitement goes, it's really hard to like just pick it up again. And I can say that like over the years you get better at that. Like I have a much better stamina for my enthusiasm now than I used to. But hey, everybody has that kind of cutoff moment where you're just like, I can't take it anymore. This is not any good. And I'm definitely no different from that. Let's see. Brandon Weatherford is asking, I've never joined Patreon. Do you teach glazing? Well, glazing is an interesting topic. I think that there's some things like in I mean, the quick answer is that the painting that actually is coming out in January, it actually deals a bit with what you would technically refer to as glazing. I think what people commonly refer to as glazing, but I think that there's a little bit of the sense that the common conception of what glazing is not actually in practice what glazing is. So the idea, and I'll tell you, like I'll unpack the kind of ideas that I think are kind of taking place here. So in general, I think when people talk about glazing, they think of doing a monochromatic painting underneath, and then basically you just kind of scrub some color into that, and it like becomes a finished painting. Now, we need to understand also like the actual technical terms, like what glazing and scumbling are. What we're really talking about is taking transparent mixtures of pigments that are either transparent or opaque. So, like yellow ochre, for instance, is a very opaque pigment. So, we wouldn't be making a glaze with yellow ochre. We would have to use a more transparent yellow, like the one that I use on my palette is yellow brown. Has very transparent properties. I think it's a lake color. So it's like basically a dye that is attached to like a particle of calcium carbonate, essentially. And so in that, you could make a glaze with that. So in this painting that I'm doing in January, releasing in January, yes, there is an indication of how to glaze, but in effect, it probably looks a lot like, basic kind of direct painting. Just because in order to actually model form and things, it's preferable to have a bit of paint on the surface. If you ever tried to literally just like color in an underpainting, then I think you'll understand that it's not usually so simple as that. Or I find actually, this is not to talk bad about like just proper glazing, or anybody's conception about glazing. I don't want to like glaze shame or anything, but I think it's also not like one of the most efficient ways to paint. But definitely, I deal with glazing. I use glazes for sure, but it's you wouldn't mistake it for being like a workshop on glazing specifically, because it's not my preferred technique. So there's insights about it, but if you wanted a how-to about how to glaze, I don't think you're really going to find it there. Let's see. Sander is asking that portable sketchbook would be an iPad. Yeah, interesting take. Like the portable sketchbook, right, has kind of changed a little bit in its composition these days, right? So let's see some other questions. By the way, Gabrielle is saying, oh my goodness, OMG, so much better than Instagram Live. I gotta tell you all. I'm very active on Instagram. If you don't follow me on Insta, it's at Stephen Bauman Artwork. I post new stuff every day. A lot of times, I'll post kind of diagrams and things that that I find interesting from a teaching perspective. But Instagram's live interface is not the most awesome thing that you can use for live streaming. YouTube is so much better. Also, hopefully, by the way, now that everybody's here, like I mentioned this at the start, and I mentioned this also like in the lead up to this, but ideally, like what these sessions are about is to kind of give you a reason to sketch along with me, right? So why I put the source image up there, so that it's not just me sketching an image that only I can see. I wanted to give everybody else like a chance to basically just get out their iPads or their sketchbooks or whatever it is, and have a reason to come and sketch as well. It's something that, I used to love about, working at like, I call it like an IRL atelier, like when I worked at the Florence Academy, right? We'd always have like kind of evening sketching and stuff. It's a great like kind of way to just get together with other artists and just do some work, be productive. It was always a really good time. But I know that for people that are working like out there, like a lot of people take their primary education online, and so there's not always like an event calling to you to do some work, and that can be like a really tremendous challenge to get over. Is like how do you stay properly motivated to paint? Which by the way, just as a side note, I'd love to hear from those of you out there that are like I said, like kind of taking your primary education online. Like, what do you do to kind of stay daily motivated, right? Like, I mean, for me, it was always about a routine. I'm such a routine oriented person. I think that, learning always benefits from having a sense of routine, because you need to repeat this stuff so much. If you're not kind of repeating what the exercise is, probably it's very difficult for you to get down to the essence or the most important parts of the lesson. So that means, if you want to learn about, let's say, if you want to learn about just shadow shapes and light shapes, like the most, one of the most bedrock concepts, right? Well, just hearing about what they are is not learning about them, right? Like, actually, you need to practice them. You need to indicate what they are actually by working with them, right? So I guess what I want to know is, what do you do to stay like motivated? Are there like routines? I know that, there's like on Insta, for instance, right? Like I follow all these like people that are into like brand design and like UX and UI and like all this kind of computer design stuff, because I feel like they have really great insights about, the way that people kind of interact with technology, and I feel like that goes straight to the heart of how people are interacting, for instance, with my tutorials. So I kind of try to gather a lot of insight there. I'm just wondering, like, are there people that you follow online that actually specialize in, for instance, like, what it is to create a motivational schedule for yourself, or something like that. Anyway, it's just a curiosity that I have about the people I work with. So let's see. Jemmy is asking, are you squinting as you block this in? Oh yeah, for sure. I think making a NoTan study, squinting down is an incredible asset for you, just because, like I said, what I'm working with here is I'm working with a really limited scale of value. I'm not actually choosing like 100 different like varieties of gray. I'm actually sticking to just 10. So if it's not on that scale of 10, if it's separated by a division that is more subtle than that, then I'm not doing it. So what that means then is I need to, like, if we're looking at this area of the ear, for instance, I'm squinting down. I don't really think that I have room on my value scale, right, to actually put that in. So I don't think I'll be able to indicate a difference in value there to show that. I just don't think it's possible on the value scale that I have. So like I said, it's very much about like kind of working within a limitation for me, and I kind of, for myself, like I kind of thrive on those limitations. I love working within a limitation. I think it really reveals a lot of things to me, right? Um, so yes, I'm squinting down a lot, and it's very much because I have to, in order to kind of understand the values and shapes that I'm working with. Trying not to put also like a lot of nuance in my brush strokes. I'm just trying to be like super simple, again, super essential. I just want to get to the kind of baseline for what makes this painting so good. Which, by the way, probably all of you know. I hope all of you know this painting. It's Sargent's painting of Lady Agnew. It was, I think, very popular in its time. Obviously, very popular afterwards as well. As like nowadays, I think kind of everybody knows this painting by Sargent. I hope everybody knows this painting by Sargent. So let's see. I've got a question from Alex Lattis is clarifying about the Mitsubishi pencils. It's High Uni HI-UNI or Uni Star. Anyway, like I said, just look for the really the most expensive version, and then you'll find it. Then there's a question that's written. I think it's in Hebrew, so I can't read the name, but it says, in your opinion, what brand is better in colored pencils, Faber-Castell or Prismacolor? That's a cool question, but probably not one I'm qualified to answer, actually, as I have not really done much of any work in colored pencil. I think that it's one of those things where, you probably have to just kind of experiment with each one to find out, what preference you have. But I'll say this about it, because there are some insights, I think, about materials in general that I can offer. The question that comes up in painting all the time is, what medium do you use, right? Well, it's a fine question. Of course, painters use mediums, and so, it's valid to want to understand which one they use. I've thought it, looking at some painters' work on Insta or whatever, and I think, oh man, what is this person using that gives them that effect? So the question is fine, but then I think the question that has to go along with it is, what ground are you using? What support are you using? Are you working on like a gesso ground? Because if you're using like a medium that has, say, a lot of solvent, and you're working on a gesso ground, that'll make sense because it allows the painting to flow a lot more easily in the beginning. But then the solvent will kind of evaporate away and kind of leave behind a slightly more workable surface. So, but if that person's working on an oil ground, for instance, you might not need that much solvent in the medium to get the paint to flow. So again, like I'm just saying, it makes like a big impact, like also what kind of support you're working on. So the question has to be like actually extended a little bit further. We need to understand some more of the context that painting is being made in. Hope that helps. Let's see. Does being a thriving artist, Agassi Reyes is asking, does being a thriving artist, is it just pure luck? No, definitely not. It's pure work is what it is. I think the thing that you get when you become a professional artist, and you're kind of working as a professional artist, and this is just my take on it. I'm sure a lot of people have takes on it, but I think really you're just like a small business owner basically, and you need to find out. Well, all right, so here's some real insight, right? When you're doing that, when you're making those choices about how you're going to run your business, you need to respect your own interest as a part of the equation, right? So people think, well, answering the question of what sells, well, that's how you kind of get to be an artist, right? Well, partly, but you got to remember that there's so many less challenging ways, I think, to make a living as an artist, or than there are like as an artist. Like working for somebody else is a lot easier. But I mean, in the sense that you just show up. If you have a bad day, so what? Like maybe you just have a bad day, and you kind of get on with the rest of your work. But if you're an artist and you have a bad day, that means that you made nothing. So, you're up against this kind of challenge. And I guess the point that I want to bring home is if you're not making work that you also really enjoy, then maybe art should be just something that you do on the side because you love it. And it shouldn't be like your primary occupation if you can't figure out a way to do kind of both of those things. That's not to like down anybody for, oh, don't become an artist, but just to say, respect your own interest as a part of the equation of your like professional endeavor. You have to enjoy what you're doing, because if not, there's just a lot of easier ways to kind of go through this world than trying to be an artist. So in terms of becoming a thriving artist, I think it is a matter of like answering those questions in the right way, making sure, like, because we're saying we're thriving, we're saying actually like that I love what I'm doing. That's a part of thriving, I think. And you got to find out where that intersection is in between, what will sell and what you like making. It's I think it's not enough to just try to answer one of those questions. So somebody's saying hello from the Netherlands. Hello back to you. A lot of questions. Listen, I know that I'm not going to get to all of them here, but let's see. Oof, yeah, a lot of. Sorry, I'm having to like scroll back to find what some of the questions are. Oh man. Okay, so let's see. Ian Anon was asking, I was wondering, did you study with or teach at Florence two Norwegian twins? If you're talking about Askar and Bjornar, then yes. Yeah, so Gabrielle is asking, can we find more value studies in your Patreon? I couldn't find anything, but maybe I searched in the wrong place. It's an interesting question because with these value studies, I haven't actually put together like a full tutorial on making them. Probably, why is that? I'm not sure. I think that I started doing these NoTan studies mostly like, I think that they would look better in a tutorial as like a gouache painting, but for live streaming purposes, it's a lot more efficient for me to do them as like digital studies. So I think what I need to do is probably film one in gouache because, my site is primarily for like analog painters and analog paintings. But maybe, maybe I think that actually studying value in between those mediums, it's really not so pertinent like what medium you're studying in, because really what you're studying is the value, not the material. So no, you're not really going to find these on my Patreon. A lot of the tutorials I do on Patreon are like I said, they're really in depth, but they're also mostly about analog materials, because I would say that in terms of working digitally, I would say that I am a novice working digitally. I'm not, I don't have any claim to any great expertise as a digital painter. Like with this thing, all I do is I'm just working with one layer here and trying to work with a value. Which, by the way, this Sargent painting, it's so funny that that I chose this one for the value study, because really just about everything down here is almost like the same value. There's so little variation in the value that he uses there. He's relying so much on color, and it's one of the things that actually makes his painting so kind of pleasant is their kind of harmony, right? So when we talk about color harmony, this is interesting. I don't usually, by the way, like to frame these sessions as like teaching sessions. This is me just like casually talking about stuff. If you want like real in-depth stuff, you got to go to the tutorials. But what I wanted to say was, in terms of like searching for color harmonies, and probably if you've studied anywhere, this is not going to be like a shock to you, but really it starts with value harmonies, right? So colors that harmonize well together, that create a sense of harmony, are often very close together on the value scale. And so doing studies like this, it kind of reveals just how much in places he's relying on that. Like this, and this is maybe an interesting moment to point this out. This area here, these two values, I'm pushing the sense that those are different, because I think the reality is they're actually a lot more the same. The division in between them is something that, like I said,
I'm using a really limited value scale, so if it doesn't kind of fit into any of those 10 value groups, I'm not going to choose something more subtle. I think that the truthful thing would be for me to treat these as actually the exact same value. I think that though, like the best thing for maybe this study might be for me to treat them as separate, so at least we can see that there is some distinction in between them. There's a very slight value change there, um, that maybe is a little bit noticeable, but it's very slight. So now, like, I'm working actually on pushing those back together, and I'm going to try and leave just maybe a sliver of value in between the two to keep them very slightly separate. Anyway, that was a huge digression. Let's see. Let's see. Sampo is asking, can you give us your take on the old cliche that art is about the process and not the product? Personally, I easily lose motivation if the piece I'm working on doesn't come out as I hoped it would. Yeah, Sampo, this is, listen, you're not alone. I always actually struggled a lot with that little maxim, because it's often stated like in such an absolute way. And there are those of us in the world, myself included, for whom, a product actually does matter. I actually do want to make like a nice drawing or painting. I want that to come out in the end. And if it doesn't, that, as you're saying, that does kind of create like a negative reinforcement for me. So my take on it is that I think really both matter. So not to have like, I mean, it's this classic binary thinking, right? Like it has to be the process or it has to be the product. You can't be doing both. Well, not sure. I mean, I think that especially in representational painting, the product and the process is so kind of like intimately tied together. It's kind of hard to separate them. Like if you're, how can you say like your process is a really good one if over and over and over the product that comes out is not what you're looking for? So I would say one is of a lot of use in kind of evaluating the other. But you got to respect both. I mean, that's probably the real answer, is that you can't like that's what like galleries will tell you that, like, it's all product and not process. I remember there was this is like a classic thing from Florence. They had this kind of lecture that this visiting gallerist was doing at the school, and the gallerist gets up there and says that her big idea that she wanted to express was just send us good paintings. And she follows that up by saying, it's okay to experiment, but just leave those in your studio. Just send us good. So what she's saying basically is, I don't have time for you to grow. Just send me the stuff that'll sell. Now, from a gallery's perspective, that makes perfect sense. What good is it to them to have your kind of unresolved experimentation on their gallery wall, like taking up space? It's not useful to them. But like as an artist, it's a little bit like you can't prohibit experimentation for an artist. Like that's how you eventually hopefully come to a place where you can say, oh, this is interesting and valid and valuable, and I kind of find my voice in this thing. So anyway, I just found that to be like a classic example of the difference in between basically what galleries need and what artists kind of need. So you got to respect both of those things, right? It's not this binary thing where you can just have, I think, one or the other. So that's my take on it. That's my opinion. Right. So let's see. Dude guy's asking what my favorite book to learn art is. I think that I have referred people already to my FAQ post in which I think I talk about some of the books, but I'll say that the one that I think I find most meaningful is Harold Speed's Practice and Science of Drawing. I think that it just, he has so much insight, and there's really so much to offer in that book. It's so dense, and every part of it is kind of value packed. So I think go to that one. You're not going to go wrong. You're always going to find something useful in Harold Speed's work. Just like I find about like Sargent, like I always find something useful and interesting in Sargent's work. Okay, so Papaya is asking, what was your most expensive artwork that you ever sold, and how much of that was cost? Well, I don't know. Talking about money like that maybe is a bit indecent online, so I'm gonna skip that question. Let's see. So Andre is saying, or asking, saying maybe, you're not following the value ranges literally on the top left. Do you do that from the start to better judge masses? Thanks so much for sharing your knowledge. Yeah, I mean, what I was mentioning earlier about this was that I'm um, I'm trying to do this study in a really kind of super limited way, which is to say, what I'm primarily interested in here is the kind of large expression of the value. So I have just off screen, I have a set of values from kind of 1 to 10, like a linear value scale. And I'm choosing not to diverge from that value scale in making this. So that means that there's going to be some areas like areas like this that become really complicated because Sargent it's really not making much of any kind of value variation in those areas. It's just very, very slight, and so that makes it really hard to kind of match his value scheme with this. So there are going to be parts of it that look, frankly, like different, but again, like I'm pretty okay with that difference. What I want to get to is like what is the simplest version of this that I can express, and that's kind of interesting to me. I'm not here necessarily to make a copy of this entire Sargent painting. I more want to know, like, if you simplified it, what would it be? Like, that's my kind of, I guess, my big question here. Hope that makes sense. So Sampo, in terms of the question I was asking earlier about like what you guys do out there to kind of stay motivated and keep working. Sampo is saying that personally I have a window of time of 6 hours every day, 6 days a week that I stick to religiously. That sounds pretty much like the old atelier schedule that I would keep. Well, in fact, when I studied, you would have 6 hours during the day, and you'd eventually have a 2 hour class at night. So eventually it was 8 hours. I mean, even 6 hours is like a pretty amazing thing to hold on to when you're studying independently. Again, it's just everything out there is kind of asking for your time, wanting to take your time for some other purpose. So we're all kind of up against that difficulty in kind of staying in front of the canvas. But 6 hours is great. Jamie is saying the first part of my routine is usually to walk into the studio and look for some content like this to get me going. Yeah. Yeah, no, I hear you. I think that's like the positive thing that's going on right now is that there definitely isn't like a shortage of like information out there. There used to be, by the way, there used to be genuinely like a shortage of information out there. Like you couldn't find stuff about this kind of education, just wasn't around. So people would be kind of searching here and there and everywhere to find like both inspiration but also certainly like instruction, right? So it's a really great kind of option that we have nowadays, just to fill our minds and our time with this stuff. So really cool. PD Pete is saying it's actually really hard if you are raising a family. I bet it is. I bet. Yeah, to find the time, which isn't easy because one gets extremely exhausted by the end of the day. hey, listen, I totally hear you. My wife and I, for us, we were not going to have kids, so I've never had to go over that like hurdle myself. But listen, I totally understand. In fact, one of my patrons was commenting the other day actually about the live stream workshop that I was doing, that it's the one way that she can like kind of tell her family that they understand that, like, I'm going to a Zoom class, or I don't do them on Zoom. I broadcast them through YouTube on a private link, but it's the one thing that like everybody in her family understands. So she can say, listen, I have a class at this time, so you can't bother me. I've got to like go and do my work here for this course. And so like in that sense, I think it's, having things like this where it's like, again, it's something that you can point to and say, hey, this is a thing that's happening. The time is limited. I need to take the time and like focus on studying this. Right. So Sander is saying, no one knows I'm sketching at meetings now that we all work from home. Yeah, totally. Chris Oak is saying, watching people draw in paint motivates me. Seeing different people's approaches and how they solve problems gives me ideas to try. Yeah. By the way, let's talk about also maybe do we want to talk about like the dark side of like having so many different sources of inspiration? I think that of course, like I'm talking a lot about the virtues of it, but do you ever get that feeling that you just have like so many sources of input, you kind of get tangled up in them, like you're not really sure which one to chase after? I know that I felt that honestly, like really before, everything was everybody was so active online. But like, just I would get a new art book by I don't know, a new book about Jan Matejko or something, this Polish painter, and I would get all obsessed with the way that Matejko would paint, and I'd of course try to make my paintings more like his paintings. I can only imagine nowadays that urge is like amplified 100 times. You can find like new inspiration like every 5 minutes about like a different way that your paintings can look. I don't know if anybody out there if you have that feeling also, put in the comments and let me know, because it's like I said, I know it's something that I experience, and I have to imagine that that probably that's not an uncommon experience for people. I think that, by the way, there's a great book called Art and Fear. My wife Cornelia is always prescribing this to students, just in terms of like what you need to know about this process. But one of the things it says over and over again is that like a lot of the problems that you're facing, they're actually not unique to you, right? Like fears about like being a fraud or like not knowing what you're doing. These are things that are like so universal, not even just among artists, but like in every trade. That sense of like I don't even remember. There's a name for the anxiety related to this, but like that you feel like a fraud. It's just like everybody else from the outside, like everybody else looks like they know what they're doing. But if like in our heart of hearts, we all know that we're like all have a little bit of insecurity or whatever. And this book, Art and Fear, kind of goes over that, again and again, just saying, listen, this is not a unique thing. You are not like alone in wondering if you're making any progress, for instance. That's another one that's like so big that honestly, it's a pretty easy thing to solve. I mean, you just need a proper way to have like structured feedback in your practice. So that one we can solve. But anyway, sorry, I digressed. I was kind of drawing and talking, and sometimes I just kind of get out on a limb and don't remember the way back. But let's see. So yeah, sorry, we're gonna skip over a few questions. Just there's a lot coming in. Let's see. All right. Jaron Newton is saying galleries used to invest in the artist. Now it feels as though they become more like a soulless corporation. Well, it's yeah. I mean, I kind of hear you that their needs, like galleries' needs, in a way, are a little bit different from like artists' needs, and it can feel like you're a little bit like two separate entities with totally different desires, right? Like I mentioned this presentation this woman was giving, which bless her heart, but I walked away from it feeling like, who are you to tell me like what to do in my studio? Like, it's okay to experiment. Well, thank you for giving me the permission to experiment in my own studio. I appreciate that. Anyway, but aside from my like kind of saltiness, um, the point she's making really is just about like what she needed as a business owner, and I get that, and it can feel like there's a massive gulf in between like artists and galleries. It's not all like that. There are gallerists out there that really just like love art, and they want to work with art, and they want to work with artists, and so that's really good. But it needs to be a relationship that is kind of good for both sides, and that's the thing to remember. As you're starting to work with somebody, I know we don't always have like a choice of like, oh, I only want to work with a gallery that works like this. That it's good for both of us. But you should, as you progress in your kind of professional life, you should evaluate it on that perspective. Like, you got to think like, well, what's in it for me? um, One thing that I over and over, I want to encourage artists to remember, and it's this slight like passing mentality that artists have, that they exhibit sometimes, is they'll say like, oh, I'm so honored that such and such a gallery chose me for this exhibition. And I totally understand where that's coming from, and I get how in some ways like that can be totally true, that you are like genuinely like very honored to be able to take part in a show, but really like you're the prize, like you're the interesting one, not the gallery, like the gallery in a way exists because you exist, not the other way around. And as artists, we really have to kind of like own that. It's kind of a maybe like a dangerous precedent to set, where we're saying like, oh, I'm so pleased that the gallery selected me to be valid. That's not really the way that we want things to go. But yeah, that's just my own like little digression about the artist gallery relationship. Just try to remember that you're the reason that all this stuff is there. um, uh, you got to kind of own that a little bit. It's difficult, but I mean, it's what you need to do. So let's see. Gabriella Baruch, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, is asking or saying, well, it'd be wonderful if you could upload one of these live studies. Yeah, there's some of them, by the way, are I have on my website, Stephen Bauman Artwork, which is the website that I made to help the Patreon navigation be a little bit smoother. If any of you out there are like familiar with Patreon, then like they use that old style like blog scroll, which is like, whew, I find it so tedious to have to like scroll through a blog to like kind of find what I'm looking for, as I'm sure all of you do. So about maybe 2-3 months ago, I hired a company to actually just improve the navigation. So I made like a separate website, and it's like a really easy like thumbnail based navigation through all the projects. So you can see like every tutorial that's out there. You can see it like automatically. They're not like hidden by months and months and months of scrolling and new posts and things. So in any event, on that website sorry, I lost my train of thought, but I'm going to get it back in just a second. On that website, you can see something called a live stream archive, and that has all of my kind of previous live streams that I've done in this way. So you can probably find some of that there, some of what you're looking for there. Yes. So, right. All right. Let's see. Yeah, a lot of people are talking about the imposter syndrome. Yeah, this is the syndrome I was talking about earlier, where you kind of feel like a fraud. I think I was using the word fraud, but imposter syndrome is what it's called properly, and it's rife in the artist community. We all feel it to like some extent or other. But again, like that's kind of the comforting thing, is that it is like it's just something we all get, like, you know, tired sometimes. Like that's just a natural thing that happens. And I think once you realize that it's just that, it's not like you didn't invent that feeling, you know, then I think it becomes a little bit easier to deal with. At least it did. At least it did for me. But let's see. Joyce is saying, thanks for taking the time to teach us what you know. Very welcome, Joyce. That's what I'm here for. And Sampo is asking, do you think there is a thing called premature professionalism? Ooh, that's a fascinating question. What are the risks of starting to advertise yourself too early? Do you think that one can study and produce at the same time? Sampo, these are some amazing questions. I mean, you know, obviously, you know, it's great that anybody's here like asking me questions, but these ones I think get to the heart of some of the challenges that we face doing this, right? Like, and I think the interesting one is, or the one that I want to address right away, is actually about, you know, advertising yourself, in air quotes here, too early. Now, we all like have Instagram accounts, and we're all following artists and things, and so it's a natural kind of next step to take, to think, well, you know, I should have an Instagram account, I should post things out there. But you can feel like, you know, maybe you're not really ready. Like, what do you have to offer, basically? Like, the question eventually that you want to answer when you're trying to create a following is like, well, why should people follow you? What do you have to offer? And the answers to that are like as diverse as we are. Like, there's so many different different kinds of accounts out there, and different kind of reasons to follow different people. But something you should be really aware of, I think, when you're making that decision, is kind of like why people would follow you in the first place. And the error that you can make in that is that you can make the mistake of thinking that people are there for you. Like, they're there to see how cool you are. And in general, I mean, sure, like some people are there because they think an artist is just genuinely cool, and they think, oh, well, they're really cool, I want to follow what they're doing. But I think in a way, the much greater majority of people are there in a way because of, in a way, like what they can take away. Like, what is the return on the investment of their time? And so you think about, you know, like people follow me, for instance, right? Just if we do like a case study, I think people follow my account or my Instagram, my YouTube account, because, you know, I've been a teacher for a really long time, and I teach online. And so naturally, like, I put out a lot of content that's educational. So they'll show up and they get some cool tip about, I don't know, like mixing color values, or doing NoTan studies or something like this. And that gives them, you know, a bit of a return on the investment of their time. It's a good reason to kind of scroll through my feed. That's what people are getting when they show up, right? So that's that question answered in one circumstance. Now, of course, a lot of us, when we start out our accounts, and I think the question Sampo is asking is like, well, before we're like an expert enough to like go out there giving advice to people, you know, what do we have? Like, what can we offer? I think that it's interesting to understand that, you know, the educational journey of an artist in and of itself, I think, is a very interesting thing, you know, and what you think I think you can offer, and it is work to do, by the way. It's not like that you just come automatically with this stuff. Like, I don't just make a post every day because a new idea occurs to me every 5 seconds. I work on it, but what you can offer really is the insights of your journey, and I think that's fascinating. Artists that you're researching, educational resources that you're discovering as you go, paintings that you appreciate. I think of that all that stuff is really, really interesting and useful. And the next thing it kind of comes down to is, the question of what about advertising yourself too early? This is tricky, and it used to be trickier, I think, because in previous eras of like online engagement, it was about kind of making a website, and you could just have a website, and like most people would have websites that would just like sit there. They were just a website online, not really doing anything at all, but they were there. There was like some presence. So if someone happened to look up your name, then they could find it there. But I think nowadays, there's so much more like kind of engagement in your online presence, and so what you want to think about is, let's say you come to the day when you have all the skills necessary to kind of go out there and kind of conquer the art world, right? Well, if by that point you really haven't built an audience, you're going to be starting on a very long, like, uphill climb to build one, right? Like, it takes a long time to build an audience. Like, I've been on Insta since probably like, how long have I been on Instagram? Probably since like 2015, maybe. And obviously, like, I've worked on it a lot, and so like I've had a lot of growth in that account, but it didn't happen like in the first year. It happened after a while. So I would really encourage people to actually start out that audience building process, I think, a little bit earlier. Just because eventually, if you want to do something, and everybody experienced this during COVID, like every artist that I know was like, okay, COVID happened, all my workshops are closed, now I'm going to do stuff online. Well, like, that's totally a cool idea, but you need like people online to like know that you exist, know that you're there to make it work. And if you don't have that audience already, it's kind of like shouting into an abyss, right? Like, maybe nobody really hears you. But and you can do a lot with different sizes of audiences. It's not like everybody needs to have like however many hundreds of thousands of followers. If you have a highly engaged but small audience, that's great. Uh, Either way, I would say start creating that engagement earlier, and later you will very much benefit from it. If you have any ambition to become like a professional in this field, that's what I would recommend. The other route, of course, and this used to frustrate me so much. Like, I had kind of a foot in both worlds. Like, I'm old enough that I was around during the like the gatekeeper era, where basically all you could do is just kind of wait for a gallery uh, to say, hey, have a show with me, or show this work with me, right? There's even like that whole thing that you can't contact galleries because then they won't want to show you. Uh, like, that's like a real mentality that existed, at a certain point, and you can see like that whatever, like the power dynamic there. I think it was a really kind of unhealthy one for artists. Um, uh, oh shoot, you know what? I totally lost my point. But what I want to get to is, oh yeah. So the idea of like being a professional nowadays, I don't think you just have to sit around and wait for it to happen. I think that the world is really benefiting much more like proactive people that are out there actually kind of making something happen instead of waiting for something to happen. Just my opinion, but for what it's worth, that's what it is. Let's see. MJ is asking, when was the process of making a drawing or painting made clear to you, and how did it feel? That's a cool question. Painting in particular, I think, is a very challenging thing to teach, just because there's so many different possible outcomes for it, right? Like, you can be like, do you want to try to paint in a way like Rembrandt painted, or are you much more into like a different kind of expression of realism, one that's more about kind of like early Rembrandt, like more refined painting and so on? Any one of these, of course, can be valid, but we kind of have to choose where we want to be. And so for institutions that teach painting, it can be really challenging because basically, they have to say, well, we're going to teach you to paint dot 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 like this, and that's possible. But the bigger the institution, I think the more challenging it is to like make it one size fits all. So I think that's a really difficult place to kind of end up. I don't know that ever like. Well, let me look at this another way. I think that initially, when I was taught how to paint, it sounded it sounded too simple. Um, but basically, you do your underpainting really well. You do your blocking and color really well. You do the next stage also really well, and then eventually you have a painting that comes after that. Now, there's a lot of things that happen kind of in between that, but suffice to say, like the actual technical process of making a painting is not the most challenging thing in the world. I think it's making it really good that is actually the hard thing. And this is not an idea that I've come up with. Like this was a famous quote by, I think it was Degas, who said essentially that painting is something that is very easy if you don't know how to do it, and very hard if you do. And I would definitely kind of stand by that idea, that it is very hard to do if you kind of know how to do it, because you can see like how subtle you can become, especially if you're studying the masters and things, right? Like it's then you really start to see like how amazing these painters in history were, and then you're like, oh well, I'll just try to do the same thing. Wow, it's really hard. So I've had various moments of realization. Maybe that's like a more helpful way to discuss it, because it definitely didn't like show up all at once. But I think it was a good moment when I kind of realized, like, again, how technically like simple it was. Like it wasn't. I didn't need like the holy grail of procedure. I just needed to use the colors well, use the values well, use the right kind of technique, and then most of it was just making sure that you had a nice repeatable way to work on it. So in that sense, yeah, I hope that's a kind of satisfying answer to the question. But suffice to say, it's not. It wasn't like one big aha moment where I went, "Oh, that's what I do." Okay, oh, I've got it now. I kind of wish it had been, but that's not the way it went for me. Right. So let's see. Questions. Let's see. All right, so I have to like scroll back to find some of the questions. Victoria Villas is saying, as a teacher, what is a common pitfall you see many beginner and intermediate artists fall into, and what words of wisdom do you have for them? Okay, here's the deal. Beginning and intermediate artists, you're starting out, you want to figure out how to do this stuff. We all know that we want to find like a foundation, right? We want to find like the basic principles about drawing and painting. I think that there are several pitfalls. One of the ones I'll mention that I think is very meaningful, and this is if you guys have, I've been asked this question before, so it's going to be on repeat for some of you, but I still think it's valuable to bring up anyway. Painting is a practical education. Just learning the theory does not mean that you've actually learned it. You can hear someone talk in great depth about painting, and it can even make sense to you. You can think, that ticks all the boxes logically for how I think a painting should take place. Putting it into practice is something different. putting it into practice is actually the important part. Well, I don't want to skate around that. They're all important parts. Having the right theory is really important, but I think just as important as that is making sure the theory is a part of your practice. If it doesn't show up on your canvas, then you don't really understand it. I used to actually come up with this. This was something that when I was like an IRL like teacher came up all the time. Right, I'd come around to a student's drawing in the model room, and I'd say, all right, so let's talk about like shadow shapes, because we want to understand like the basic organization of shadow and light is kind of going to be the foundation of the impression here. And some students, not all students, but some students would go like, oh yeah, no, I get that, but like, how do I do ... and then they'd ask some other question. And listen, I totally get it, but the reality is, if you really did understand it, right, and I'm coming around and I'm looking at your drawing, then I would see that you understood it, and I probably wouldn't bring it up. And this to me is like an example that I think we can, at times, we can believe because we've heard something or because we've tried it a few times that we kind of get it. But really, it has to be like totally integrated into your process, in your hands is the way I usually put it, right? Like when I would teach anatomy, what I wanted to do was to try to get students to have anatomy as part of their practice. I mean, it's great to have the theory. It's great to be able to like name the veins on the head, but like if you can't really like draw a rib cage, or you can't in your process integrate the knowledge that you have, then it's not really a great kind of knowledge base. It's just kind of a kind of generic knowledge that isn't really affecting your outcomes. And I wanted to affect people's outcomes. I think that, like I said, your knowledge should really show up in your work. That's the goal eventually, right? So it's a practical education, and you have to treat it as such. For every idea that you learn, you probably need to practice it, I'm not going to say 100 times because that's kind of daunting, but you got to practice it a lot to make sure that you get it. A couple of people asking about the program that I'm using for this. It's Photoshop. Yeah. That's interesting. JD Anarchy is asking, what techniques are you using for advertising? Fair question. I just do like, I kind of rely on the content. I haven't done paid advertising to any great extent. I think once I did like a Facebook ad just to see like what it was all about. I think that in a way, for like scalable businesses, like eventually paid advertising should probably be a part of what you're doing. Like it should be a part of your plan, because you can reach so many people. Like social media has really got a great sense of organization in terms of how to get your message out there. So I think that's something you should probably engage in. I don't necessarily use it myself yet. I mean, maybe I will in the future. I don't know. But yeah, so techniques. I guess the biggest technique that I would say I use is I just try to be consistent in that I post like something every day. And I think that's a big part of it, is just kind of showing up. And it sounds like a simple thing, but even like back in the days where like people had blogs and things, that was like half the battle was just making sure that you're there, making sure that you show up consistently, and people can kind of build a relationship with you because of that. Hope that helps. Hope that makes sense. But that's generally what I do. Let's see. Renfall is saying, I've actually recently started building a body of work in oil paint and took my website down and stopped digital commissions to focus on traditional 100%. Well, that's another thing too, is that, this stuff is generally like really hard to do. And so, you kind of want to get to that place where you're you're kind of dedicating most of your time to one kind of study rather than a variety of them. Because if you're trying to be a little bit of like a jack of all trades, sometimes you can get to that place where you're like, you know, a master of none. We've all heard that that quote before. So just something to be aware of out there, that you know, if you really want to become an expert, you got to kind of drill down uh, into kind of the subtleties of the work that you're trying to make. Right, so let's see. Renfall is also asking, how do you rate online galleries like Saatchi? Well, you know, if they get the job done, you know, I mean, I think there's nothing wrong with it for sure. I think that's eventually that's the thing, like for artists, is that you want to realize is that it's about like efficacy, like your relationship with a gallery. Um, you know, like you can show with like a really class gallery, like something that looks really great. If they're not moving your work, they really offer quite a limited value to you overall. And I think that's worth kind of taking a look at in terms of evaluating where you're at and where you want to be. Because I think we all artists can be like guilty of going like, ooh, like kind of wanting the applause, like a little bit wanting the prestige of like, oh, I work with XYZ gallery, you know, and they're really prestigious and fantastic, and that's cool. Like, by the way, there's nothing wrong with working with a gallery that has a really well respected name and stuff. Um, but again, it's a transactional relationship. If they have the coolest name in the world and the best following in the world, and your paintings don't sell there, again, it's a limited value that they're offering you. It's not no value. I mean, you know, you do want to think about also like, you know, if you're working with a gallery that has like a really great name, maybe there's some prestige associated with that um, makes you seem more like popular to your particular following or in your field. That's okay. It's not to say that's not a thing, but you know, in the long run, you know, you want the paintings moving off the walls into people's collections, and fueling your next kind of artistic endeavor. If it's not doing that, you need to kind of like rethink that relationship. Hope that helps. Yeah. Let's see. Chris is saying, what do you think is the balance between longer drawing and quick sketching, like gestural drawings, in improving drawing skills? Should I do one more than the other? This is an interesting one, also because, like, if you know my work and like you know my teaching, a lot of it is related to actually making like longer, much more finished studies of the figure. And something you're speaking to there is certainly, it's not new territory. You know, in terms of like artists wanting to kind of create a balance, or art teachers wanting to create a balance there. Again, I would refer to, I'm pretty sure it was Loomis who was talking about this. He was saying essentially that, no, you know what? This wasn't Loomis. This was a different article that I was reading in specific about the site size method. I was just kind of going over a few old articles that I had in preparation for my drawing essentials workshop. Which, quick plug, just yesterday I did the first in a series of drawing essentials workshops that I'm making, covering basically the foundation of what you need to progress as an artist. They're available to my Patreon subscribers. If you subscribe at the $10 level, then you have access to the live streams, access to all the tutorials, etc., etc. It's all there. But these drawing essentials ones, I think, are really what certainly my followers have been asking for, and I think something that can really be productive for them. But basically, I was reading this old article about kind of site size, and it was a kind of a back and forth between a teacher whose name I forget and the person writing the article. They were kind of writing letters, I guess, back and forth, and we're talking about basically the limitations that site size can have. And one of them was that it kind of puts you into this situation where you're used to doing your work, but only in optimal circumstances, like where everything is perfect and conducive for you to make the work that you want to make, then you can make it. And as we all know, right, optimal circumstances are infrequently the rule, right? They're much more the exception. And you see this all the time. Like people would go to school at the academy, and they would make great work at the academy, and then they would like go out there into the world, and there's not like the perfect studio set up for them. There's not like models around all the time, um, and you see that these inconsistencies could eventually affect their work negatively, right? So that's a real thing. Wanting to train in order to have versatility. I'm a big believer in that. So I would say that, and I've lost a little bit the thread of the question, unfortunately. It happens so much. It happens even more like if I have to, like I was doing this live stream, and I try to like write something out on the screen while I'm talking. I cannot write at all while I'm talking. So I just have to like finish writing it out, and then go kind of back to speaking. I can do better with drawing, but sometimes I actually lose the plot a little bit. So that's what happened there. Sorry about that. Let's see. Somebody whose name I can't quite pronounce says, thanks for doing this. Do you approach your graphite work differently than digital work in terms of establishing values? I would say that the closest thing in the analog drawing world to what I'm doing right now would be drawing essentially with pastels, right? Or pastel pencils, where you could have a series of shades of gray, and you could apply them, or even, by the way, actually, sorry, probably better than that. I was thinking in the drawing world, even better than that would be like a gouache study. That would be a lot more like what I'm doing than, say, like a graphite drawing would be. You can do the same exercise in graphite. It's not that you can't do it. But just in terms of like the way I'm doing this one, is probably a lot more like a gouache painting than, say, like a graphite drawing. So graphite, of course, though there are different like hardnesses of lead, like, it's all essentially, the application of it is all essentially pointing towards a single value. And that's I think the main difference. You could also, like studies like this, you could do in oil as well. It's not to say that you can't do that. But the non-blending essence of it, right? Like oil, it's quite easy to actually kind of blend oil together. Gouache, it dries so fast that you can barely like get it onto the paper or onto the substrate before it starts drying. So in that sense, this is very much like, or I treat this very much like gouache. Let's see, some questions. I don't know how long we are in, by the way. It's probably been it's probably been a little while since we started, but I think I scheduled this to go until 7, but I have no idea what it is, or till 6. Yeah, so we got about 22 minutes left, something like that. Sophie Price is saying, I feel like I have so many ideas of art I want to create that I hold back on making because I don't trust my ability to create the piece. Can you trust your skills, and does that go away with experience? That's a difficult question. I mean, when I think about like useful, I don't know if it's even advice, but just useful experience that I've had in this realm, I would say that you're probably best off getting your ideas down on paper in some form, or on canvas in some form, because the ideas that exist in your mind are like perfect, right? Like I think every time that I think up a painting I'm going to do, it's perfect. There's never any flaws in it. It's the best painting that I've ever made. When I get it out onto paper, though, I can look at it a little bit more objectively. I can problem solve, and therefore it becomes a kind of like a living idea. And I think this is probably kind of huge for painters. It's just making sure that the ideas that you have, eventually, that you discover the reality of them, and they might be like, by the way, they might be totally fantastic. It's not to say that we're going to uncover always like, something undesirable, not at all. uh, but that we need to know what it is, and there's no time like the present when you have that idea in your mind to start it out. In fact, like one of the most kind of popular paintings that I ever made, I had actually been doing sketches of it for a few years actually before I ever put it onto canvas. And obviously that can create also some intimidation. You can feel like, oh my goodness, like now's the time when I'm actually going to make the painting. Like you can get a little bit tense about it. But I think in the long run, it's good because I had so much time to like sit with the idea and figure out what I really felt about it, right? Whether I thought it was really good or not at all. By the time I was ready to make it, I was so ready. Like, I just dove in, and in fact, like the painting process was, super smooth because of that. So it's worth considering, right, that the process of kind of getting something down on paper is not just, for the sake of sketching. It's not just for this or for that. Like it's also to kind of let the idea like grow, like let it become more and more clear in your mind, like what it is, what it's supposed to be, and how you want to represent it. Because, I mean, the other thing that can happen, of course, is that we have the idea, we think the idea is great, and then we put the idea down and we go like, oh, that wasn't. I thought it was going to be much cooler than that. But that's the time to like workshop it. That's the time to like, look at it and go like, oh, what if I did it this way? Or, what happens even more often is that you start to realize that, oh, this idea actually would be better if I did it like in another way. Or that you can have ideas that kind of cross pollinate. You can think, oh, the background for this painting should look like this. But then later on, I'm doing a sketch of a painting and I realize, oh no, that background would be great on this one. So just give yourself a chance to, to kind of let your ideas grow. I think that's really useful. Right. So questions. Andre is asking, would you still choose Patreon for your main teaching platform considering today's options? I think that you're talking about like Schoolism and a lot of these other, programs. If you clarified a little bit more, like what other options you're talking about, might be easier to answer that question. Um, I mean, in general, yeah, like I'm really satisfied with Patreon. It has its own problems, like, and I mentioned some of them here. Like, primarily for me, it's the problem is actually just that since they have so many different kinds of users, like their platform is not organized specifically to do what I want it to do. It's kind of it's created to like, be the home for like a lot of different, kinds of pages. So in that sense, like I could be like a little bit, dissatisfied with it, but overall, um, I've only had like kind of positive experiences with Patreon. So it's been very good to me. And as such, yeah, like I mean, of course, it's natural then to be, quite satisfied with it. Right. So, uh, Fun Nut is asking, were you trained self-taught or did you go to school? Yeah, I went to school for about, studied at the Florence Academy for 4 years, and, during that time also I was an assistant teacher, and, and then after I graduated, I was teaching there for 12 years, 10 years, something like that. So I've been like in the academic system, I think, for a really long time. Um, that's my, background. It's also why, like I'm a big advocate for, like basically like kind of having instruction, having proper instruction when you're learning. Not because, I want to be some, absolutist that's saying like, oh, you can't be self-taught. I just know that, there's a lot of things, a lot of struggles that you'll have being self-taught that you don't actually aren't a necessary struggle. Like there's some very efficient ways to kind of figure out how to do this stuff, and a lot of people have spent lifetimes basically documenting how to do it, right? So like kind of not taking the opportunity, I think puts you at a little bit of a disadvantage in terms of just getting the results that you want. So anyway, that's my take on it. For what it's worth, I believe a lot in education, probably because I was educated. Let's see. Wait a minute. So someone is saying Renfall is saying adding JSOP, which is a good friend of mine from Sweden. Says I'm sure he'll reply, but personally I never drop opacity on brushes. Does that mean JSOP? It's like putting JSOP's here. Hey, listen, my very good friend JSOP is in the chat right now. It's happening. He's the coolest guy in Gothenburg, Sweden. So hi Jay, and he's asking, when using Photoshop, are you changing the opacity of your brushes? You go, the only brush that has any opacity is the one that I'm using right now. So this is at 60%. All the rest of the painting is done with 100% opacity, partly due to the kind of study that I'm doing, right? So like I'm, all that I want to figure out with this basically is the value structure of Sargent's painting. And so rather than, because like with opacity, when you start switching that up, basically what you're trying to do is you're getting to a kind of rendering point, which is fine. Like that's a part of a lot of different exercises. It's just not as big a part of this exercise as, say, like just trying to nail the values. And I feel like, you know, and this is an interesting kind of takeaway here as well, is that, you know, when you are kind of, you know, making a study that is meant to kind of communicate the just the values, you can kind of choose your approach based on that. And like there are approaches that are going to be like more beneficial for that, because I feel like at a certain point, you know, an artwork is made out of like different kinds of application. Like when you're actually making a resolved image, rendering is going to be a huge part of it. But the role that value plays is somewhat obscured by the rendering, if that makes sense, right? So like, let's say like as an artist, I have really great like technique for rendering. Let's say that I do. I think that I'm a pretty, you know, I'm pretty average at rendering. But let's say that you have a really fantastic technique. That great technique that you have is actually going to be covering up sometimes for deficiency in value, which is totally fine. Everybody has strengths and weaknesses in different places. But when you're like making a study of value and you're just trying to study the value, I think it's better to actually to take the rendering out of it. So that way only the value is speaking, right? Like you don't have any kind of influence of like your very proficient technique. You just have the value to kind of turn the form with. And if it's not working, it's immediately evident. And that's kind of what I want here. I want the values to show whether I got it right or whether I didn't. So like I said, the only one that has any opacity control is the one, this smaller one that I'm using now. And that's just because in my heart of hearts, I'm a little bit of a renderer. I can't steer away from it completely, but probably 99% of the painting is done without any kind of rendering techniques or overt like alterations in that way. Can't believe Jay Sop's here. Wow, this is a moment. Let's see. Mohammed Asufi is asking, I want to ask you about the Angel Academy in Florence. Yeah, so shout out to the Angel Academy. Some of my good friends were educated there, Jana Jaskalainen among them. But so there's a few different academies in Florence, and each one has like their kind of different take on art education. And I'm going to try to give the balanced view, which is to say I'm not going to just give you the pretty answer and say like everything's rosy because we're all a part of a very small community and like everybody knows what everybody else does. The Angel Academy really has a great painting procedure. Like if you just want to figure out like basically the technique of oil painting, I think it's a really good place to go. If I'm offering a balanced opinion, I also feel like they have a very rigid approach to painting. And as I know it from the outside and just from knowing a few people that have studied there, that in a way can be a little bit of a weakness too. That it might not have like the depth of experimentation that you might want from your painting school, which is totally fine. Uh, but I think like you can't go wrong like going to the Angel Academy. They definitely have like an incredible foundation in terms of like how they get you from walking in the door to being a proficient painter. John Angel also, he's the kind of head instructor, or not instructor, I guess the director there. And I've met him a couple times. Probably he doesn't remember me. I've met him, and I remember meeting him, but probably he doesn't remember meeting me, because I was just a student back in those days, and students in Florence were a dime a dozen. There's so many of us. Um, but at any event, yeah, he's a kind of chill guy as well, nice guy. So shout out to John Angel and the Angel Academy. Let's see. Remy Fourmont is saying, "Hi, Stephen. When working from a photo, what are you looking in it to translate in a drawing or painting?" Yeah, this is an interesting one because, so little background on me. When I studied, when I went to school, we studied only from life. So it was just life studies all day, all evening. That was the reason for being, was to kind of study from life. And as such, of course, you gain a lot of insights based on kind of working that way. And then to go along with that, even when I work from photos now, which is quite frequently, honestly, I still work on them like I'm working from life. I don't really like change my approach to like, oh, now I'm working from a photo. Now I'm going to do kind of everything differently. For me, I think that I just kind of apply the same ideas, but just from a photograph, right? So for me, I don't notice like a ton of difference in between them. And actually, I try specifically to do that. And I think that's, some people have asked, or I get the question sometimes, like everybody wants to know about style and this and that, and like how do you develop your personal style? I think you develop it through working, right? I mean, that's like how I got to the way that I paint. Like, it's why my paintings look the way they do. It's just like I discover the things that I like in the techniques that I use. I think that's essentially, if you wanted to like boil down style into something, maybe that's a good phrase. At least for my purposes. I don't want to be, say everybody has to think of it that way, but that's how I think of it. Um, but so when I'm working from a photograph, I'm just trying to interpret the same way. I'm looking at it as kind of light and shadow. I'm looking at it as a set of like kind of constructed three-dimensional forms. In a way, I would say that I feel like I'm pretty kind of versatile in how I approach drawing and painting. Now, that's not like I'm not saying, oh, I'm such a cool guy, I'm so versatile. But I've taken a lot of time and attention to study a lot of different approaches to drawing and painting, right? So I learned one way to look at the world when I went to school at the academy, right? I did a lot of study of sculpture on my own, actually, like studies of classical sculptures, making little sculptural studies myself. And that gave me a totally different perspective, actually, on rendering form and on construction and so on. And I've done a lot of other experimentation with different mediums that have different properties and kind of force you to exploit different aspects of visual phenomenon. So that's been a big thing. I've been teaching for, again, like 12 years. So I've kind of been around the block several times. And I think that that's probably, why when I look at a project or I look at a photograph, I'm looking at it in so many different kinds of ways, like just because there's different kind of strengths and weaknesses to each approach. But primarily what we're talking about, right, is we want to be able to make a kind of believable three-dimensional structure in our painting. And that's probably the place that I have come to rely on the most, is kind of thinking about three-dimensional structure. I would say that probably in my work, I would say, ooh, I'm like drawing lines now. It's making me nervous. I have a very visual approach naturally because that's how I trained. But I believe that I have supplemented that a lot with a lot of kind of structural and anatomical knowledge. So I think that's where I'm at eventually. At least that's how I think of it. I know that they're probably. I would have loved. By the way, I would have loved to study with somebody like from the Repin Academy. I would have really loved to kind of get into that fantastic, amazing, like an unbroken tradition that they have. You know, like in the West, you know, we went through this period where nobody could study like painting anymore. I even remember like when I was a student, I went to a couple of years of college in the States as well, like an art college, before I went to Florence. And I remember hearing a lecture from an artist called Gary Boulding. And I think he had studied in New York when he was younger and was a student. This is like a lecture that he was giving. And he said that like actually the most rebellious thing that he could do at the time when going to that school was actually to paint like from life, to actually paint representationally. Like it was just not a thing that was done, you know, it was discouraged actively. And so in the West, we had this moment where we just kind of totally broke that tradition, where we stopped painting representationally. And a lot of like the techniques, we're not going to say secrets, this is not a thing, but a lot of the techniques involved in like learning to kind of draw and paint were kind of, if not lost, at the very least, they were obscured, right? And because of that, we had this kind of massive kind of deficit. We needed to like rebuild painting education, and I think that's on the way in the States, but it's definitely not all the way there. I mean, like a lot of schools are basically just like conceptual art schools where they will again still like actively discourage you from learning just to paint, which obviously I think is a nonsense, but that's another story for another time. But the question. All right, I lost the question again, guys. Sorry about that. But we're also coming like probably to the end of the time here. I think I gotta run. But I do want to say, well, yeah. So anyway, I don't know about this study. We got to a decent place. I think that actually the stuff down here, wow. I mean, that's like such an intensely kind of unified area. I don't know that I feel like I got like a super great degree of kind of resolution there. Some of the interesting things that I did find though was actually just like how little value variation that he was using. I was kind of almost like almost surprised by it. Like I knew that I would find a lot of unity. I didn't know I'd find that much unity. It almost kind of threw me off. So that was kind of a really interesting part of drawing this one, and I hope that all of you that I hope like you're out there. By the way, I hope all of you out there are drawing or sketching this along with me. But if you're not, please do so next time, and kind of like go through some of these insights with me. And yeah, anyway, whatever. Thanks everybody for watching. Just a little bit of housekeeping. If you're interested in all the really in-depth tutorials that I do, which is like 180 hours of them or so, they're all available through my Patreon. You can subscribe for $10 and you have access to all the stuff. On top of that, the live workshops, in particular, the Drawing Essentials series. The first one came out yesterday. The edited version of that will be out in a couple days as well, so you can watch it after the fact. And the next one's coming up, TBD. To be determined when the next one comes out, but part 2 is going to come out in the next couple months. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and take it easy, okay?